Okay, so the first time that I ever taught in a classroom was doing a model lesson when I was in BJJ in Beis Yaakov Ezra's Torah. Needless to say, though I am born in Israel, my Hebrew was that of a 5-year-old. And to go in front of 25 first graders and do a model lesson in Hebrew was a very scary situation. I asked somebody in BJJ, what parsha is the parsha for Shabbos Chanukah? In which they answered, Miketz. I did not check it. I did not look at the calendar. I just went with what I thought brilliant girls knew. Got to the model lesson, said hello to everybody, and in Ivrit I said, Miza Parsha HaShavua b'Shabbat Chanukah, and one girl raised her hand and she said Vayeshev, and I said, I just wanted to be nice. And in the back of the room stood the teacher, and she said, Ken Nachon, and I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was like, it's not Miketz, it's Vayeshev. So, needless to say, I don't recall what I said. I don't recall what I do. I do know that I didn't pass out, which, considering that I was in front of 25 Israelis and 2 teachers from Beis Yaakov Ezra's Torah, is a miracle. What I said after that, I do not know. When I was preparing this week's Parsha, and I know it's Shabbos Chanukah, I was like, Vayeshev! Oh, okay, I can handle this. In this week's Parsha, we talk about dreams, we talk about Yosef. And I think that Yosef represents a lot of what those of us in the past couple months have been struggling with. There are 3 things that we have to live in this world. Amunah, which according to Rebbetzin Shapiro, that I listened to a share from, said, Amunah is belief. We believe that everything is all good. Bitachon, we see that good in our daily lives. We hand in the wrong piece of paper to the Board of Ed and they don't yell at us. Hashem did us a miracle, right? Any little thing, we believe that God is involved in every single little thing. And then there's Hishtadlus. How much do we actually do our own efforts, right, to work? And I think as teachers, doesn't make a difference if you're teaching Kriya, math, reading, we all struggle with those 3 things. Belief that all is good, that Hashem created these children that sometimes struggle. Bitachon, that we see on a daily basis that they are making progress. And Hishtadlus, how much do we spend teaching them? How much do we say, go to OT, go to speech, go to a doctor, get more services, right? That's what we are. And that's what Yosef represented. He represented Amunah. I believe that there can be change. I'm having dreams of change. Bitachon, I could be stuck in the middle of a prison, and I know that even in the prison, this is meant to be. And Hishtadlus, he prepares the entire Egyptian world for the 7 bad years, right? It's not just let's sit back and daven, but let's store some grain. And that is why there's going to be a Mashiach ben Yosef and a Mashiach ben Yehuda, because that's what Yosef brings to the table, all 3 of those issues. So today, we are in the Hishtadlus world. We are going to talk, and by the way, the brain is literally the biggest miracle that there is, and we still do not fully understand it. Even the greatest neurologists and scientists will tell you that they haven't quite figured out what's going on in the brain. But our goal of today is to do Hishtadlus. Let's learn about some new things that are going out there. Let's educate ourselves, and that's going to be the conversation. Now, if all of you see there's a piece of paper on your picture, and we all love the comfort zone. The comfort zone is what we're used to. The comfort zone is where we're comfortable, right? What we have to do is take our brains in order for us to get growth, and there are stretchy toys on your table, and stretch. We have to go into that stretch zone. We as teachers and therapists are in the business of stretching, right? We're taking kids out of their comfort zone, right? And we're stretching their brain and we're teaching them new things so that hopefully they can get into the growth zone. But there's one zone that's not on this paper, and that's the sick zone. That's when you have altitude sickness. You have taught them too quickly. They cannot handle it. They get anxiety. Their life is not necessarily capable of being so much in the stretch zone that they become too overwhelmed and they cannot learn. And we're going to address some of that altitude sickness, right? If you go to Machu Picchu or if you go to a mountain, I mean, not me because I know I get altitude sickness, but, right, if you go too high too quick, you get sick. And so you always want to stay in that stretch zone so that you can bring them into the growth zone, but you don't want to get them into the sick zone. And we're going to discuss some of that today. All right, I want to welcome Dr. Alon Seifen. Okay. I've had the pleasure in Florida of practicing with him for the last year. This is not somebody who and he has an unbelievable resume. He's worked in, Columbia University. He is double certified in psychiatry and neurology. But what I can talk to you about is my work with him. As a BCBA, we all know that behavioral therapy has limitations. And there are times when you have to go higher. You have to talk about what can we do with this brain that may not be developing in the correct way. And it has been a pleasure to practice with. So just so I can tell you some of the growth that we plan on doing here in Tree of Knowledge, having experienced some incredible issues with getting into psychiatrists, nurse practitioners here, Tree of Knowledge will be opening up a clinic for next year that will include clinical psychology as well as neurology and psychiatry. That is the plan. Not funded by the Board of Ed, hopefully funded by insurance, because we recognize that it's kind of a missing piece sometimes of what we're dealing with. And I also feel for the teachers and the therapists that are working within Tree of Knowledge, we need to have some higher quality people that can answer our questions. Now, disclaimer before this conversation starts. 1, you as therapists, teachers, staff of Tree of Knowledge do not have an opinion. You're not allowed, according to the ethics, to have an opinion. Your job is to report data. He isn't picking up the reading. We've tried this reading program. It isn't working. You cannot recommend to a parent the medications and some of the things that we're discussing. You can tell them to seek higher authority, but you cannot recommend medication. Now, once a child is on some of these treatments and you know about it, which in the ideal world you do because you can work hand in hand, again, your job is to take data. What's it like in the morning dealing with his behaviors? What's it like teaching him how to read now? You can report data which helps somebody like the doctor change medications, fix medications, and things like that. So I really want a disclaimer. Now, I started off Tree of Knowledge with a private practice called Skills Without Pills. And in fact, in the year 2000, one of our first trainings for staffs in Cleveland, Ohio, was sponsored by the makers of Ritalin. And at that event, I got up and said, I am absolutely diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. I hate stimulants, and I have anti-medication. Well, surprisingly, Ritalin, the makers of Ritalin, never sponsored our luncheon again. But anyways, I've come full circle. I've opened my mind because I have seen where medication is very effective, not only in the area of stimulants, but in anxiety, and then in the higher level psychotropics, which unfortunately some of our kids really do need. So I no longer have an opinion, but here's what I do know. We need to make sure that when we are not being effective, that when we have tried every research-based possibility, that we know when it's time to say, hey, we need to work in conjunction with other people. Regardless of your personal opinion or your personal struggle taking or not taking medication, that has no play on the child that you're working with. And we feel that at this point in the game, with so many kids on medications, You do need to understand a little bit better how they affect the brain, what's going on, so that you can take proper data. So last time we did nutrition and natural ways of helping, and today we're going to flip the switch. No opinion either way, but we are going to stretch our minds so that we can sit and listen, so that at least we educate ourselves in what's out there. Thank you very much. And now we are going to get started. Okay, so we're going to start low level, and then we're going to go high level. So we have an example of a little girl that comes in the morning, and she's always having stomach aches. And she's always struggling with her stomach. What are your thoughts on things like that? School, stomach aches.
Can everybody hear me?
You probably, yeah, take that.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am a neurologist by training, with specialty training in neuropsychiatry, and I'm here because I was really been trying for about 10 years to find better solutions for people who are suffering. And when I realized this basic idea that mental health and brain health are split into half, that most patients with psychology or psychiatry needs, they actually have neurological needs, and most patients with neurological needs also have psychiatry needs, I came up with this idea that I call reunified brain care. And that means just making sure that a child has access to both in the same visit. And I've been getting such fantastic results just by using evidence-based medicine in each field. And so, yeah. So when I realized how powerful this approach is, taking a more holistic approach at brain health, and I had such success with patients in Florida, many of which were very disadvantaged, I started to dive into Hashem. Can I have more access to helping the Jewish community? And I think today is an example of that prayer being answered. So I just want to thank you very much, and I'm here to provide any resources possible for all of you and the families that you work with. But the example that Nikki is talking about is a perfect example of children who are having belly aches, or that's called a somatic symptom. That means that something's happening in the body that's related to psychological fear. And so there are no treatments that are good at treating somatic symptoms in psychiatry. So that's a perfect example of that's a gap, right? And so what's happening in a child, and this is very, very frequent, and I would encourage all of you to think about how many children in your class are getting belly aches and going to the nurse once or twice a week, either because of a bellyache or a headache. They usually don't complain of headaches as much as they complain of belly aches. So what's exactly happening in a patient who's getting belly aches? Well, I can tell you that many times they'll go to the gastroenterologist and they'll do every test possible to look if there's something wrong in the belly, and there's nothing happening in the belly. And they get all kinds of treatments to treat the belly that don't work. So it's coming from the brain. So it's very important for us all to know how stress affects the brain. And in my clinic, I started to ask myself, what is it about stress that can be done in a better way so we could actually treat symptoms? So it turns out that the brain has a battery saver mode. So basically, the brain knows when it's getting overwhelmed. So altitude sickness is a good example of, if someone feels overwhelmed or overstimulated or afraid, the brain will it will switch itself off in certain areas in order to protect itself, because the brain runs on energy. So we know in migraine patients, when they get overstimulated or stressed, the brain will basically shut down so that they can restore their energy, and then it turns it back on. So these examples of children getting belly aches under stress or overstimulation, what's happening is the brain is saying, okay, I am going to shut down engine 1, or I'm going to shut down engine 2 so that I can get through this situation until I have more energy. And what will happen is the connection between the brain and the belly will change, and then the patient will have a somatic symptom. So that's the phenomenon that's happening in the brain. And so this is a stress-based phenomenon. The reason that's important is because that means that anxiety and fear can come from stress, headaches, belly aches, and even depression can come from stress. But we don't have treatments that target stress. We have anti-anxiety treatments, we have anti-depression treatments, and the problem with stress is it will shut someone down so that they can't stay out of the fear zone. So basically, completely prevent them from being able to engage and negotiate their problems in a productive way. So if we could find ways to better manage stress through skills without pills, and if we can also develop treatments that actually target stress, patients can actually start to get more out of their therapy, get more out of their education. So that's what I've been working on for several years. So so when I learned about the stress system, I realized, it was in residency actually, that there's 2 parts to the stress system. Everybody knows the adrenaline piece. Adrenaline is like the fight or flight response, and that's happening in the bottom of the brain. So our old brain, the brainstem, will basically turn on under stress. But if you learn more about neurological basis for stress, the top of the brain also responds to stress. And that system is not adrenaline, that system is angiotensin. And when the top of the brain responds to stress, not only will someone have physical symptoms and fear, and emotional symptoms like fear, they'll actually get cognitive symptoms. So some patients will have a day that feels foggy, or a day that they can't find their words, or a day where they don't have as much motivation. That's coming from the top of the brain. So I had this kind of eureka moment where I realized that if stress has 2 parts to it, the bottom brain and the top of the brain, then what if we found safe treatments that balance both parts? And I started using 2 old medicines that we've been very successful for in neurology for different kinds of migraines. One of the medicine works for migraines that come from the bottom of the brain. The other medicine works for migraines that come in the top of the brain. And in the first patient that I tried this treatment on, they came back to the office with improved posture and more emotional expression on their face. And they said, I feel like myself again. I feel clear-headed and I feel calm. And by the way, I want to fix my roof. My neighbor's driving me crazy. I miss my parents who live far away. And I started to worry, is the treatment making this person worse? It wasn't. It was actually that they were finally feeling better and able to start to address the things that were holding them back. And so I repeated this treatment multiple times over the course of several years. And I'm currently working to get this treatment FDA approved, first for panic disorder, and then later for ADHD and PTSD and migraine. So you may hear about this treatment in the next year or so as a breakthrough neurological solution for mental health. But that whole prelude I'm giving is because we've been, in some patients who need it, trying this medicine out for some of our patients together. And one of the first ones was this girl who was having belly aches and not wanting to go to school. And I guess you might want to tell them a little bit more about the results.
So it was unbelievable. We couldn't get this girl to leave the gate of the school. She would hold on to the gate, and really any ABA thing that we tried, any reinforcement, any rewards, it wasn't working because she was so in the stress moment that we couldn't do it. And once we started this medication, we were able to get her to come into the classroom. And I'm not saying that everything is perfect, because when you have a year of which this girl was crying every single day, not going to school, that doesn't get cured in 5 minutes. So there's an immense amount of things that have to happen with this student who lost an entire year of school holding on to a gate outside of school. But we were able to start getting her back into the classroom. You have in front of you papers about this. And although we were going to end with some of this, I just want you to see a little bit about this. One of the things you mentioned yesterday to me, though, was also using magnesium. If you're not going to use, an un-FDA approved drug, that one of the areas to start with was magnesium. We're going to now go to our favorite area of the brain, which is the frontal lobe, which is what we mostly see: disorganization, executive function. We have a lot of very fancy educational words for this. But the bottom line is what we see in our students is their inability to focus. And we know that there are precursor behaviors to reading. One of them is to sit down, and the second one is to focus, right? So what do we do? Let's address the stimulants. Let's just go right into it in terms of for kids that no matter what we do, really just have either very high impulsivity. I saw it yesterday in my office, touching everything. There's only so much behavioral therapy that you can do when you have so much impulsivity and so much lack of focus. Want to address the stimulants?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that many people, first of all, stimulant medications, they're recommended for ADHD, and they're particularly useful for children with hyperactivity. And not every hyper child has ADHD. And so the first issue to recognize if a child might benefit from treatment is if behavioral therapy has failed. And many parents will be afraid of considering medication, but it's important to understand when we think about brain development, and this applies to all of us as adults, not just to children, the brain grows and the brain stays healthy throughout life, including late life, by building brain connections. So what you guys are doing every day with the children and learning, that's actually connecting areas of the brain. When children make connections, that poises them for their next stage. So they go through growth stages. The first one is at age 6, then they transition from 6 to 12. And believe it or not, the brain keeps developing from 12 to 25. At age 25, there's a major shift, and another stage happens until age 40, and then probably every decade, including menopause, which is like adolescence, is part of brain development. So the more connections that can be built at each stage, the more the brain is poised to build on top of those connections. And it's really fascinating if you start to think about this in terms of kind of a fluctuating course, where what I've realized now is the way Hashem has made us is our traits are layered over time. So you might notice this in your children. Up until age 6, you might see some of the traits from the father are more dominant. And then right at age 6, you'll see that the mother's traits start to layer over. And you'll see from age 6 to 12 more features, both cognitively and emotionally, that relate to the mother. And then from 12 to 25, again, you'll get a switch. And I'm starting to do more research on this to be able to pick this up. So we're basically like being braided. The brain's being braided together over time. So ultimately, when we become adults, we become this complex mix of traits that we've inherited from our parents. And that's really, really fascinating if you connect it to stress, because if the brain's stress system means that the blood flow is changing, what will happen is one of those traits will become overly dominant. So that even though I should be kind of an introvert like my mom, but also an extrovert like my dad, under stress, I might be shifted more towards one or the other trait. And that can start getting in the way of my school success, getting in the way of relationships. So when you think about whether we want to treat patients with stimulants, we have to weigh the risks and benefits. the risk of a child not making those brain connections and not learning at the pace that his or her peers are learning, that risk is much more dangerous than any risk of any of the medications that we know that we use. There are all of the drugs that are prescribed, they're all safe, and they've actually been tested over the course of decades and decades. There is nothing worse for a child, nothing, than the child not achieving his or her own potential. So that's the first kind of thing to think about when you think about whether a child should take medication, including stimulants.
Okay. We're going to end with this because I think stimulants are a little bit of the low level, and now we're going to get into the higher level, which is psychotropic drugs. And this is when we are seeing a lot of emotional irregularities. And unfortunately today, we are seeing a lot of emotional irregularities. We have lots of nice terms for it: bipolar, dysregulation, schizophrenia, scary words, autism. But what we're seeing over and over again as a unifying force is this emotional dysregulation, that they simply cannot regulate their emotions. And now we're getting into higher level drugs. And without them, they cannot regulate their emotions. And I want you to address some of them. Risperidone, what I find is that, especially with the stimulants, sometimes we use stimulants, but it's really an emotional dysregulation, and then the stimulants actually don't work. It's one of the ways that we see that it's much more of an emotional issue. So let's talk about that.
Well, the stimulants work if the diagnosis is correct. So sometimes the child will have the wrong diagnosis, and they'll be treated, and then you'll learn that the diagnosis is not responsive to stimulants. So when we think about whether a child would benefit from kind of the highest level of drug treatment, which is really an antipsychotic medication, when a child's harming themselves or harming other children in school, usually that's like the red flag that a diagnosis that would benefit from antipsychotic treatment should be considered. So if a child is not learning, they would benefit from an evaluation for medication like a stimulant. But if a child is actually hurting himself or others, then they can actually benefit from antipsychotics. And what's important for everyone to know about antipsychotics in children is that they're used in the tiniest little doses, so that especially if they're combined with other treatments, they don't have to be at the doses that are associated with all the side effects that you read about when you go online and read them. So they're much safer than they look on paper.
And as a BCBA, and as somebody who runs Tree of Knowledge, and I've spent much of my time in schools, at least 3 days a week, going to visit schools, there are those children that are hurting. You don't necessarily see them so much hurting themselves, although you do in the autism world with headbanging. But in the dysregulation world, they're hitting, they're pushing, they're shoving, they're tripping other children. And so we have to, I think that a lot of educators are not aware that we do have this higher level type of kid, and I'm seeing it more and more. So we just need to know about that. I want to, I'm going to end, because I think you started with the newer treatment, right? And you guys have papers with you in front of you. I want to just end this with questions from the audience. So we'll pick like 5 questions. Obviously, Doctor will sit around, here for a little bit of while we do this, but I'm always cognizant of the time. So I guess just raise your hand and we'll go around. We'll do only 5 questions because that's all we have time for. And I'm well aware of the fact that people can't sit for that long, because I can't sit for that long. So we'll start over here. Go ahead. What's your question?
So let's say there's I'm
Yeah.
thinking of a child that is on medication such
Right.
as either Concerta,
Right.
methylphenidate, one of those, and is there a way, like, what can you do? I guess I'm like on a lower, more basic
Right.
level to help like change the brain or like, you know, neuroplasticity? What can you do to help this child?
Did you hear her question? I'm just going to repeat it. You have a kid that is on stimulants, right? And you as a teacher, right, their job in this room is to...
They are well behaved.
They are well behaved, but you
It's
want
not
to
a
stretch
behavioral
them.
issue.
It's not a behavioral issue, but you just want to make sure that you are, I guess, stretching them as much as you possibly can. And what are your thoughts on that? To me, you know, years ago when they started giving out Ritalin, doctors had more time, and they were doing like 1 week Ritalin, 1 week off Ritalin, and working with the teachers to fill out forms to see if it really makes a difference. So a lot of times we don't even know how much of it's working and how much of it's not working. No doctor today is going to do a blind study. But the question that she has is, okay, so now he's on medication. What do the teachers do?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. If a child's on medication and
Yeah. Like, let's say such a child, they're prone to extremes, right? Like, they tend to or have a hard time with flexibility.
Right.
These are, you know, red flags for ADHD.
Right.
So they still have these red flags. So it helps them concentrate better in class, but from a behavioral perspective, they're not like out of control behaviorally, but... So let's address rigidity. Let's address rigidity.
I think the question relates to partial relief. If a child, certain of the symptoms are getting better, but certain other symptoms are not getting better, assuming that behavioral treatments, which I would let you speak to, are maximized, that's the problem in mental health care right now. So for ADHD, the actual evidence tells us that Ritalin should be combined with a medicine that balances stress. So we have guanfacine and Intuniv that are added to Ritalin so that there's not just an effect on hyperactivity, but there's also an effect on focus and behavior. So if a child is not fully responding, it suggests that they're actually not, they haven't been diagnosed and treated correctly, because the child should be pretty much thriving if they're on the right medication.
And I do agree with the diagnosis. It's similar to here in Lakewood, like the first level of care is speech, right? And that's great because speech therapists do an amazing job. But what you're seeing is that they'll say, oh, yeah, he has ADD or he has ADHD, but he has all this all this rigidity, and that's not ADHD, by the way. So we have to start looking at the whole picture. We have a huge amount of high-functioning autism going on in our community. And that's also what I have found is many times parents have come to him and they've said, oh, this is what my kid is diagnosed with. And he's like, yeah, but then why isn't the medicine working? Obviously, the diagnosis isn't correct. And again, as professionals, all we can do is report and encourage parents to be a part of that meeting. I cannot tell you how many times I sit in meetings with him and it's not the parents... They'll say things like, yeah, she stopped crying. She's been great. The teacher told me she was great for 3 weeks. I was like, I could have sworn I was in the school yesterday and she was throwing a fit. You know what I'm saying? So it's a parent's job to want to report positive. And I get that. And that's why it's so important to write down the behaviors, because then professionals like himself can really see the full picture when they do the diagnosis. You have a question? Yeah.
Very related. I want to know if there's anything, when a child is on medication, there are many learned behaviors that they're not used to being a real learner in the classroom. So is it supposed to be like a flip and now they're fine? Or is there a way to transition them to become a real successful learner?
So what do you always say? The research shows that the most effective treatment is a combination of medication and behavioral therapy. I'm going to give you an example, right, that we've seen a lot. I work with a lot of kids who get tubes later on in life that nobody realized that they couldn't hear, okay? And at 5 years old, they realize that they have to get tubes. And we miss this critical part, right, from 2 to 5, socialization, speech and language. So people go and they get the tubes and the child wakes up the next morning and they're so excited that the kid could hear. And I'm like, sweetie, that is the beginning of this. We miss 3 critical years And now we have to go back and make up for that. So I think medication is one piece of it, but you're 100% right. If there's learned behaviors, right? So just to give you an example, the kids that get tubes late, right? So they've done certain things on their own, right? They walk and they talk and they're right in front of you because they can't hear, right? But you don't want them to do that. At 5 years old, you don't want them holding on to you, right? So there are ways that they've had to retrain their brain because things aren't working. So even once medication works, there is a process of retraining. You don't wake up from a stimulant and learn to read. You have to go through that labor process. It may take a year of multisensory learning for you. So it's very, very important as teachers. Medication is not a miracle drug. If it was, I'd be like so happy, but it's not. I was joking around with Adina Weiss yesterday. Usually we give presents that are associated with what we're learning about. So we did. We gave you brains. We gave you games. I was considering giving out value. When I grew up, I don't know if those of you know, maybe this will age me, but when I grew up, the Holocaust survivors, when I used to go visit them, they were all on value. And we just got through like a massive pogrom, so I'm thinking maybe we should go with that Valium again. But, but anyways, any other questions? Yeah, quickly. Go ahead. Shh. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We mentioned wrong diagnosis, and that's, it's not having a team. This is what I say all the time. Wrong diagnoses happen when it's one reporter. That's my opinion. You can say what you think. When it's just a parent going to a doctor without feedback, I know that in the psychological world, right, when we do a psychoeducational testing, we do educational testing, we do mental health testing, we talk to the school, we talk to the teachers. I think one reporter is what gets us into trouble, but you can say your opinion on that.
So I'm still looking for one patient for the last 10 years who has only one diagnosis. No, but I mean that like not because different people have a different opinion. It's actually because the rate of comorbidity it's the rule rather than the exception. So when we assess a child holistically, we look at is there a neurodevelopmental disorder like ADHD, learning disability, or autism? Is there an anxiety disorder? Is there an affective disorder like a mood disorder? And also, is there a migraine disorder, which adds the neurological piece? Mm-hmm. If a child didn't do well on a medication in the first place, how risky would it be to try it again? It's not risky, it's just a little bit foolish because it's a suggestion that approach didn't work. Sometimes there may be a reason why to try again. These diagnoses are usually kind of part of the development of the child, so it's unlikely if a medicine didn't work 3 years ago that their brain would change and it would work again. It's more likely that they have either a misdiagnosis or an incomplete diagnosis. And so sometimes children's anxiety needs to be treated in addition to something else.
I'm gonna conclude because we always say that we don't like to go long, but I said the doctor will be here. I really thought about it this morning when we talked about this, that professional development for our staff, these type of programs are based on questions and feedback from you. So please feel free to email me if you want to continue on brain development. I mean, to do brain development in 30 minutes is like a joke, you know? But we felt like these were the important topics that we had to discuss, but we can do it again. We can bring in different people. So please provide feedback to the Lakewood office on what you would like to see and what you would like to learn. Thank you. One last question, okay?
I think for most of us, like a lot of this is like out of our league a little bit because we wouldn't even be aware necessarily of how many students are or are not on medication, something that isn't necessarily close to us. As us in the research room, we play a student one-on-one and we see a child who's not performing. at what point is it that we go over to the principal or make a mention, like you said, we just collect data, we're not here to like give recommendations, but like at what point do you say we have like a real issue that really needs to be taken a step further? Because most parents are not running to the neurologist just from the therapist in the room. They don't like focusing on it. So like at what point do we say this is like becomes disorder? Like
So I'll tell you what we follow. No, it's a good question. I'll tell you what we follow in office, and I think it's what the doc. She said, at what point do you say it's time to go to a neurologist? It's time to go to a psychiatrist. Like, here's a name of a doctor. Here's the name of 10 doctors. Please, make that recommendation. So I'll tell you the rule of thumb, and I don't know if this research supports it, but I'll tell you the rule of thumb. Number one, intervention. First thing to do is just regular research-based intervention. They're getting speech therapy. They're getting, tutoring. They're going to reading specialists. You're doing the regular intervention. I think the time to recommend it is when you get stuck. It's when you can't do that. Also, what I also find is sometimes I'm not stuck in the behavioral process, but I have to try to keep that kid in a regular school. And in order to keep that kid in that school and not make them go to a specialized program, it's only going to happen with that situation. Yeah.
Is that a lot of times there's like people see relief when they go to OT or things like that with like focus. And
Right.
Like that. And then like parents get frustrated, like they tried this, they tried that, okay, nothing works. Nobody knows it's a Pokemon. The school's just not trying hard enough for the child. What would be like warning sign that this is more like a neurological or like a psychological issue versus like a core deficiency, focusing that could be addressed with something easier like OT. So we do see sometimes that OT does help, so then we do it with obviously not neurological thinking.
Okay, the question is about like warning signs that something more than behavioral intervention is needed. So very importantly, because I'm a neurologist, if a child is having headaches or belly aches on a regular basis, first of all, there's a natural treatment. It's called magnesium, and they can spend more time in class because magnesium gives the brain energy. So the first warning sign is if there's physical symptoms of headaches or belly aches, because if they're having those, it likely means that there's a comorbid neuropsychiatric condition that could be treated. And then the other one is what was mentioned is when maximum behavioral intervention has failed is when to consider. Correct.
Okay, we're going to conclude this program. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. Again, you can send me emails. You can give your, ideas for the next conversation, and he'll be around if you want to ask him questions. Thank you.